earlier this year, I went on an 8-day retreat at Bodhianarama, Wellington in New Zealand. And in this video, I'm just going to share the things I've learned from going on this retreat, things I've noticed in myself, and also break down a little bit about how the retreat worked, what we did, and things we weren't allowed to do. So on this retreat, we were not supposed to go on our phones. We're not supposed to talk unless it was necessary to get something done. For example, can I help you carry these plates upstairs? But things like, how's your day? Where you're from were generally discouraged and not allowed. We're not supposed to read anything apart from the chanting books during chanting. We were not supposed to eat after 12, and we had to keep the 8 precepts. And I tried my best to follow these rules strictly until the last day where I was a bit lax. Now, a bit of context, I kind of grew up with the Thai forest tradition, and I stayed at this monastery for 3 weeks a couple years ago, so this wasn't really my first experience living in a monastery. Alright, so while at this monastery, what we did, we meditated for 6 hours every day, and usually it would be a 40-45 minute session of sitting followed by a 40-45 session of walking meditation, and in the afternoons we'd switch between the two a few times, and if I remember correctly, it was around 6 hours total of sitting plus walking every day. Occasionally we'd get the opportunities to ask the monk questions, and I asked a few questions and I got some answers which I'll share with you later. We chanted twice a day in the mornings and the evenings. In the evenings often we'd get to listen to a Dhamma talk by one of the monks. We ate 2 meals a day, breakfast and lunch. Sometimes there were dark chocolates in the evenings which are allowables. And during the day, we often assisted with things like cleaning up the monastery and washing the dishes, help prepare the food, and just general chores like that. So things I have noticed in myself. Generally, I feel like after a retreat or after some time spent at a monastery, I always feel like I'm at a higher vibrational state. Like I see things different, I feel different. Like if I stare and focus at something, sometimes certain things vibrate, which I find a bit buzzy sometimes. Social anxiety is a lot less, and I'm much more aware of my thoughts. And I can be like, oh, those are my anxious thoughts again, or I'm feeling angry, without being consumed by the thought itself. So that's always a thing we strive for in this practice. I also noticed a slight amount of me being angry at myself for signing up to something like this, because part of me wanted to, do other things, make content, train at the gym, eat a diet higher in protein. And I was almost fighting myself to be there, and I had to remind myself that I'm only there for 8 days. After these 8 days, I can, focus on other things, but just focus on meditation just for these 8 days, and you'll be all right. So I was almost fighting myself, so I had a bit of resentment towards myself, but that's all right. I've also noticed that my next few steps in terms of what I want to do with my life became clearer. It's almost if my compass that I'm following has become recalibrated, so I'm going in the direction which feels most authentic, true to myself, and the direction I want to go. I've also noticed that after the retreat, when I'm scrolling TikTok or Instagram, that the thought of, oh, I'm scrolling TikTok and Instagram, I could stop if I want to, that thought comes a lot faster than usual. And also memories that I had way back in the past, maybe like between the ages of 5 to 10 or even 15, that I thought didn't exist, like I hadn't thought of these memories for a long time. Often they come to the surface during moments and periods where I, have no distraction. So memories resurface every time I, don't have distractions like my phone. And environment like a monastery definitely allows those memories to rise to the surface a lot easier. Now, in terms of lessons that I learned from the monks, either from their Dhamma talks or from me asking questions. I just have a few, and I'm going to share them with you because I think they're quite insightful. So in terms of your meditation object, because in Buddhism there's many different meditation objects. It doesn't necessarily have to be your breath, but in terms of the selection of your meditation object, the abbot of the monastery, the head monk of the monastery, said that it should be coarse enough that we can hold it in our minds. For example, if we watch a candle, we can definitely hold that in our minds because it's quite solid, it's quite tangible. We focus, and that's the meditation object that works. But also it has to be fine enough that it requires concentration. For example, say I can count to 5 with my breath, like 1, 2, 3, and that requires me to both count and focus on my breathing, and that's coarse, and that also requires concentration. But then say this is too coarse for you, it's easy, it doesn't require that much concentration, you can go more fine and just focus on the breath without counting. So throughout this retreat, we were encouraged to find a meditation object that was, solid enough that we can hold it in our mind, but fine enough that it still required concentration. Second lesson I learned was that after enlightenment, you can still have negative emotion, but just no suffering. So the Buddhist path, the goal is to attain enlightenment, and when you attain enlightenment, you're supposed to have no suffering. You don't endure suffering. So what is enlightenment? The end of suffering. But then he still said that you can still endure negative emotion after enlightenment. So does that mean then you can have negative emotion but not suffer? So I kind of asked this question to one of the monks, and he gave a reply to me. He said, yes, you can have negative emotion but not suffer. For example, say I have the negative emotion of anger, and how can I not suffer if I feel anger? Well, he said that you don't have to judge or be consumed by the anger. You can be aware of your feeling of the anger, not get consumed by it, and be like, oh, those are my angry thoughts, those are my angry feelings, and you may not suffer because of that. So you can feel anger, which is a negative emotion, but not suffer. So if you kind of view your emotions and your thoughts from a third person almost and not be consumed by them, then you may not, suffer as a result, which was an interesting idea to me. And lastly, the last lesson I learned from the abbot, the head monk, was that if I have a desire, should I pursue it? And he said that if the desire comes from an undercurrent of the good like emotions such as compassion, love, generosity, then those are desires which should be pursued. Those that come out of greed, hatred, selfishness, those desires are not really wholesome desires and therefore should be let go of. Because in Buddhism, a common phrase is desire is the cause of suffering. But then he kind of said it was like a linguistic problem, a translation problem, because a lot of Buddhism was in Pali right back in the day and translated into English. So some people argue it's more craving that is the cause of all suffering instead of desire. So yeah, he kind of made the distinction that if it comes from a more, higher state of consciousness or all those higher vibrational emotions, then we can pursue it. And if it comes from those lower ones like guilt, shame, hatred, and so forth, then we can let those go. And those desires, those cravings are the roots of suffering. So say I'm sick and I'm looking for medicine, and I have the desire to find medicine that helps me become better, that comes from a emotion of self-compassion, self-love, and therefore, yeah, most definitely we should seek out medicine, right? So that was the example I kind of asked him about, and he said, yeah, if it comes from those higher states of emotions, consciousness, then we can we can act on it and it'd be good. Lastly, some personal insights, some things I learned personally from going on this 8-day retreat. Firstly, I think music really echoes in our minds for a very long time. Like when I went to the monastery and I was meditating, I could, remember songs and music echoed in my mind. And I didn't remember when I last listened to that song. Like it'll probably be months ago or a long time ago, to the point where I can't remember. So music definitely echoes in our heads, I believe. And therefore, we need to be aware of what we're consuming, right? Because if it echoes in our heads and we aren't even aware of them most of the time because we're distracted a lot, then I feel like it's likely that the lyrics would have a impact on us. Whether the lyrics are good or bad, it affect us, even if we may not be aware of it. So I think consumption of the right music is very important. Second insight, I think stillness gives us clarity. So if we get still, we can get clear on, what we want to do or the right decision, instead of getting distracted and seeking externally for solutions. Sometimes internally is the way to go, and the way to access the internal stuff is to just sit quiet or do walking meditation or just get still in general. And then lastly, the last insight is that I think the path illuminates the more you walk along it. For example, during this retreat, I met someone who described a monk who was previously in the Thai army. He decided to give all that up, and then he became a monk. And I was very intrigued, so I asked my parents about this monk, and my parents said we actually met when I was a very little boy, and I got his contact detail from the person on the retreat. I messaged him, and I actually went to Thailand and I visited him in rural Thailand, which will be a topic for another video, which I'll link somewhere. I'll make it soon. Yeah, the path illuminates the more you walk along it. So right now I'm back after the whole Thailand trip, and I've got a lot to reflect about that trip, and I'll definitely share some insights with you on the channel. But yeah, the more you walk along the path, the more it illuminates, and you don't have to know exactly where the path takes you next. You just gotta, be present. All right. I hope that was helpful. If you want any more tips on how to live at a monastery or something like that, let me know. I can definitely share some insights with you. But I hope that gives you some insight into what a retreat would be like. Thanks for watching. My name is Junius, and I'll see you in the next one.